Well, hello and welcome to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I am the founder, executive director, and the host of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. Really excited to have you here today. I always love hearing that little intro play. It just makes me ready to be here. I hope it makes you ready to be here too. So if you're not familiar with the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, we were started over 5 years ago now. We were started really initially focused on the issue of restraint and seclusion happening in schools across the country. While our focus on restraint and seclusion is still a very strong and driving focus, it is beyond just restraint and seclusion. It is often, in a broader sense, restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment. It is often the things that are done to kids, very often in the name of behavior. Many of those things which are causing harm. And of course, it's not just schools. We don't want to see people restrained or secluded in hospitals or acute psychiatric care or other placements as well. We believe that we can do better. And as Maya Angelou often says, if you that quote, which I always love, do the best you can until you know better, and when you know better, do better. That's what drives us here as well. It's about doing better and knowing better. So excited to be with you here today, as always. I am fortunate to have an exciting guest with me today, and a guest who I've gotten to know over the past, I'll have to figure out how long it's been, but it seems like it's been a couple of years now that I've known Dr. Weaver. Dr. Weaver is going to be talking a little bit about a program that she developed, and I'll introduce Dr. Weaver here in just a moment. But before I do want to make a quick pit stop here and talk a little bit about those that help us to bring this live event to you. So we've actually now got a couple of sponsors that help to enable us to bring this live podcast to you, because of course it takes resources and time and dollars and all those things to create this. And our first sponsor that I want to thank is Supportable Solutions. And Supportable Solutions is a company that was started by Connie Persick, who is a friend, a colleague, someone that is doing a lot of amazing work. And I got to know Connie, a few years ago. After I met her, she was in Dr. Lori Disatel's Applied Educational Neuroscience program, and we've been collaborating on lots of things ever since. But I want to share with you a little bit about Connie's work and her Why Toolkit. So I want to thank Supportable Solutions for being a sponsor, and let me share with you a little bit about the Why Toolkit.
Behaviors are signals to the deeper whys. The Why Toolkit, a tool built for and approved by teachers, parents, and administrators that can both assess and support individuals struggling with behaviors. Connie has created a document that turns typical behavioral documents upside down and replaces them with a deep dive into what really matters: how to support each child within a compassionate and relational framework based on their individual differences. The Why Toolkit was found to decrease seclusion and restraint by 21% in a year-long pilot study.
And I want to thank Connie and Supportable Solutions for being a sponsor for our podcast. Encourage you to go check them out and learn more about the Why Toolkit. The great thing about it is, even if you just want to explore it as an option, I think you can get a single license to kind of dive in, see what it's all about, learn more about it. And of course, the hope would be that you might be able to, if you're a school or a district, adopt it more widely, or if you're a parent or a caregiver, checking it out, making a recommendation. That's how these changes happen. And I want to thank Connie again for supporting our work. So with that, let's get to our special guest here today. I am joined today by, someone who I would call a friend and a colleague, and someone who's doing a lot of amazing work, Dr. Nancy Weaver. And I'm going to read through a little bit of a bio here, and then we'll get into some conversation and talk a little bit about Nancy's work. I feel like I could give a bio without reading it, but I'm going to give this full bio here, and then we'll tell a little bit more. You have a keen interest in promoting emotional health and working with schools and agencies to nurture growth of all kids and adults using strength-based methods. You consult in areas of messaging, community team engagement, teacher training, strategic planning, and program design and evaluation. Dr. Weaver is also a performer and improvisational theater coach, and she uses tools from applied improv to strengthen collaboration and innovation in work settings. As a tenured full professor of behavioral science, and we're going to talk about that, at St. Louis University. Her research has been funded by the National Institutes of Health and Center for Disease Control and Prevention, among others. and has led to the widespread dissemination of effective parenting programs. Most recently, you launched Support Over Silence, and we're going to talk a bit about that today, to provide bystander training to support parents and children struggling in public. Dr. Weaver is the co-director of community engagement core of the Center for Innovation in the Child Maltreatment at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. Using a system lens, Dr. Weaver grounds her research, teaching, and practice in the rigor of the scientific approach, the art of storytelling, and the importance of connection across people and sectors. And of course, there's more that I could say about you, and I probably will in a minute here. But Dr. Weaver, Nancy, I'm going to call you Nancy if that's okay. It is great to have you here. Always great to have a conversation with you. And what those that might be watching today don't know is that we've had many conversations that are probably going to be a lot like this, that we've just kind of had one-on-one. But I think I mentioned to you at one point, I'm like, hey, well, you got to come and join me on the podcast. And we're going to have another one of those conversations today, but we'll have a couple people that might be watching and joining us. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for the work that you do. I know we've had some opportunity to kind of, connect and learn more about each other's work and kind of the intersection of that. So welcome, and thanks for being here today.
Well, I so appreciate your podcast and this avenue of spreading these messages and really thinking about these really important topics for kids and adults, and really happy that you have this platform. So I'm thrilled to be included.
All right. Excellent. Well, before we get into our conversation, I just want to encourage those that might be watching live now. Let us know in the chat, put a comment in, let us know who you are, where you're from. It's always fun. It's always fun to see, we see a lot of kind of regular participants that join us almost every other week for these events. It's always fun to see them. It's fun to see people we've never met before. It's also really interesting because we tend to have people from across the world that will join in, and it's not uncommon that, we'll have somebody from Australia, New Zealand, or the UK. So let us know in the chat who you are, where you're from, just a quick hello. And I already see one from Idaho. Thanks. And that one's from Trisha, who, again, someone who has been part of our community for a long time. Happy to be here today, and we are happy you're here. But others, feel free in the chat. Let us know who you are and where you're from. And I will let you know that many of you that watch regularly know that Courtney is my assistant, and she often is helping out behind the scenes and doing things like sending messages like, hey, let us know who you are and where you are in the chat. She's not here today. She's on vacation, a well-deserved vacation.
Oh, nice.
And I think at the beach as well. And that means I remember as a dad, beach vacations, which mean it's fun, but it's also a lot of work. So, Courtney's not here today, but I think we'll be okay. A couple other people have said hello here in the chat. Jenna, I just had a conversation with Jenna recently, actually, an occupational therapist in Atlanta, Georgia. And we have Paula here from Nova Scotia. I feel like I've had a lot of conversations lately with people in Nova Scotia, and great to have you here today, Paula, as well. So, Nancy, let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about how we connected. And I think you're a good storyteller. And you talk a little bit about kind of how we connected and kind of why that connection led to some collaboration. And so I'm going to let you kind of just share a little bit about the story about how we got connected here.
I should have scrolled back on LinkedIn to find the date and the text message between us. But the story goes that it was a couple 3 years ago. It was maybe in the midst of COVID. And I just, was doing my LinkedIn scrolling, and you had posted something very alarming about seclusion and restraint, maybe a statistic on how many kids were secluded and restrained in schools, or that it was still happening, or that there was some horrific consequence of that. And I posted some cheeky little comment like, "You've got to be kidding me. This doesn't really happen." And you messaged me and you're like, "Yo, Dr. Weaver, it happens. We should talk about it." And I said, yeah, I want to talk about it, because it's one of those things that I hadn't appreciated. And I've been doing kind of peripheral research for a really long time on child maltreatment, child abuse, child neglect, parenting programs. My lens is decidedly public health. I'm a public health professor. And that whole world was just, it was a blind spot for me. And you and I met for the first time shortly after that. And we're just.
And I'm going to intervene here for 1 second, because I felt like challenge accepted. I'm going to find that message here. And I just went into LinkedIn and I found on September 19th, 2022,
Okay.
you sent me a message, and the message was, here
Oh
it is.
no.
Ready? The
Mhm.
first time we connected, you said, okay, what the actual hell? Prone restraint and seclusion rooms? I might need to learn more about all of this. Unimaginable. So that was our connection point. And
So I
I
started.
responded and said, I'd be happy to connect with you and tell you more about our work. And we ended up from there, meeting and having a discussion. So I'm sorry,
That's
go
hilarious.
on. But when you said that, I'm like, well, let's look and see if I can find it. And there it was.
What an entree, but what a pickup line. What the actual hell? I mean, come on. I remember when we first talked, I was just so reactive to our conversation. And you are so studied and so informed, and just your depth of knowledge on these topics is extensive. And you just kept going. And my jaw was on the ground, and I was just responding in a really kind of heated way. And I remember in that conversation saying something like, I can assure you that I am also a very serious scientist.
Mhm.
Because the conversation was just so revved. Because I think we all, when we approach these topics, we have our own emotional response to these kinds of things, which in our conversation I really did. Like, I couldn't imagine, unimaginable, like I said. And so we were able to calm down after that exchange and start thinking more kind of strategically and tactically, and using kind of a transdisciplinary lens and bringing each of our tools to kind of our conversations, which
Mhm.
was just really a nice launching point, because you allowed me to just be like, what? And that's how we started.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And of course, you have and we talked about this kind of in your intro. You have a background in and I'm just trying to get my words right here, behavioral sciences, and and of course, the conversation as it goes often goes to the fact that many of these things that are done to kids in schools happen under that larger umbrella of behavior. And a lot of the things that are still happening in a lot of places are very so I'd like you to talk a little bit about because at face value um, I'm thinking how to put this the best way I can, but a lot of our work that we've been doing is concerned about a lot of the behavioral approaches, that are in fact based in behavioral sciences. So talk a little bit about that, kind of
Yeah.
your background and that connection point, and then because I know that you've actually I think from those conversations we started having. I remember one of the things you told me in our conversation, and I'm going to get the words here wrong, but more or less how that you're at a point in your career where there are things that really interest you, and you like kind of following those interests and seeing where they lead, and and it seems like you began down a couple of rabbit holes there to look into some things that I think were revealing to you. So
Hmm.
talk a little bit about that journey, if you would.
Oh my. Um, it it's a long journey that has a few kind of sharp pivots, if you will. And I need to go back a little bit further to kind of maybe orient the conversation. So
Sure.
my training is in analytics. I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics and statistics. My master's degree is in biostatistics. So I'm like I'm an analyst. I see the world kind of empirically and conduct my research really grounded in that empirical knowledge seeking. Um, and then after a while, I realized, well, that's not my primary interest. I'm really curious about how people behave the way they do. Why do we make the choices that we make? So my PhD then was a big pivot to behavioral science, which is like grounded in the public health field of an empirical lens, but borrowing heavily from the social sciences. So I go from an empirical world to a social science world, and I'm trucking along in my social science world, really using tools of social science and behavioral science, which largely are based on rational thought. Many of the behavioral science models are grounded in, if someone is going to make a rational choice about how to behave, here are all the levers that they will consider in arriving at a decision that works for them. And so even then, the social science are really grounded in like rational thought. Well, then our conversation started happening around the same time that I saw really alarming consequences of COVID. And I took another huge pivot, which was, I don't think that many of our behaviors really are grounded in a rational approach to decision making. And then I was like, well, I got to learn about neuroscience. I have to learn about the nervous system. I have to learn about what happens when we are dysregulated. And most notably in schools, like what's happening in the bodies of children and staff and teachers when we don't feel safe, when we don't feel ready to learn. And I looked at my tools of public health and behavioral science, and I didn't find them as useful. So that explains sort of the other big right turn I made in my career, which was to say, we need different tools, we need different models, we need different partners at the table. We need to ground our work in a whole set of different sciences. And so now I've been sort of exploring, like you say, I jump down rabbit holes all the time, but it's because I wasn't satisfied with the explanations that we have. And now we know so much more. I mean, you quoted at the very beginning of your intro, you do as well as you can until you know better. And then you start using those different models that teach you how to do better. So that's what I've been doing lately. And it's been so satisfying because like we're hitting the sweet spot with how our knowledge is coming together with practice. And it's super fulfilling and satisfying.
Now, I have a question in mind, but before I do, I said Courtney was on vacation. And what is Courtney doing on vacation? She's watching the Alliance Against Seclusion Restraint live series.
At the beach.
That's right.
Hi,
That's
Courtney.
right. At the beach. Courtney, we were just talking about you, and we miss you and hope you have a great vacation. So let's talk a little bit. So there's a lot to kind of unpack here in terms of your background, the work that you have done, historically, the work that you're doing now, the things that interest you, and of course, when we began our conversation, you were sharing with me your background kind of in public health, right? And, I don't know that a lot of people really have a good understanding of kind of like what is in the realm of public health, and then how does that connect to some of these issues?
Well, that is a good question. And thank you for asking it, because I've been to a lot of conferences lately, kind of in your neck of the woods, so to speak. And I'm looking around for my public health friends, and they're not there.
Right.
So this is a good question to pause and address. Public health broadly is about sort of the study of disease and illness and health threats broadly. From an epidemiological lens, like what's the magnitude of this health threat in a population? And then how do we understand it? How do we understand communities, design interventions and programs that support and address that health threat, evaluate those, and then think about policy approaches, how we analyze data to really move the needle on improving the health conditions of populations. So it's population focused, it's prevention focused, and it's really broad to include health management and policy and disaster preparedness, using kind of a system approach to like how things integrate and intersect. So we go from epigenetics and neurobiology all the way to complex analytic tools and geospatial analysis. But where it shows up a lot in this field is in the upstream prevention. So we are really focused on risk factor analysis and determinants of behavior, and really thinking about how we set people up for health and success. I don't know if I've done my public health colleagues. I don't know if they would explain it the same way, but that's sort of the lens I bring. And that's the field of public health. So when I hear people talking about prevention and upstream approaches and social determinants and program alignment and all of that, that's the wheelhouse of public health. So that's why we need our public health friends at these tables, I think.
Yeah, and you said a lot of interesting things there that I want to come back to. And of course, you said one of my, I have some favorite words, and I have some words that I don't like.
No,
very much.
no. Don't tell me it's upstream.
Upstream is one of my favorite words, right? Yeah, I mean, you knew that was coming, and you
I
probably
know it's
know,
coming.
you probably know what I'm going to say next. And it's based on another great quote, right? So the quote from Desmond Tutu, rather than pulling people out of the river, how do we go upstream and figure out why they're falling in, right? What can we do? And
Yeah.
again, public health having this kind of focus on preventative and long-term impacts. So there's a natural question that comes to mind, and I'll actually pose this to you in a second. But the question that begins to come to mind is, well, gee, why isn't there more intersection with some of these things that I care about, and that a lot of our audience here cares about, and public health? Why isn't there more intersection there? And I'll pose that as a question in a second. But I also have gotten to see this a little differently. And from one standpoint of the fact that wow, like suddenly these conversations with you become an intersection, these conversations that we've had. One of the things that came out of our connection, the reason that one of the things I really love about doing the work that I've been doing at the Alliance is I have the opportunity to connect with people like you, people that are doing a lot of amazing work, and find these intersections that maybe we don't know existed before through these conversations. And one of the intersections that kind of came out of you and I talking, we this past spring had 2 interns from St. Louis University. That was really based on a conversation you and I had. And I'll be honest with you, initially I struggled a little bit with, okay, well, what's the connection between public health and the work that we do? And suddenly it started to become really clear to me. And and that is that upstream and preventative piece. One of the things that we focus on a lot, again, is that upstream preventative piece. But this idea that a lot of the kids that we're talking about in the context of the work that we do at the Alliance are kids that, as I put it, are misunderstood in the name of behavior. And kids, because they are misunderstood in the name of behavior, because people are looking through a lens not informed by neuroscience or trauma, but because they're looking through a intentional lens, right? They're looking at behavior as being very intentional, like you talked about early on. This actually leads to approaches that aren't working for a lot of kids. And in fact, not only aren't working, are failing a lot of kids, which means that a lot of kids are having a lot of things done to them in the name of behavior that are actually causing negative impacts, causing trauma. And one of the things that I focus on a bit here is this idea of systemic trauma. This idea that we have systems of care intended to support and intended to help that sometimes are doing harm. And the other side of this, downstream from the systemic trauma, are significant issues that I think everyone would instantly agree are public health concerns, are drug abuse, alcoholism, incarceration. So to me, as you begin to connect the dots here, there's actually a really strong and compelling connection between, looking at not only trauma, childhood trauma, systemic trauma, these issues of kind of educational approaches, but there's a really strong connection there to what happens downstream in terms of from a public health perspective. But it doesn't seem like as a wider area that this has been really explored. And I actually met with one of your colleagues earlier this week as well, another professor at St. Louis University. And he was actually a professor that was working with one of the interns that we work with. And after our conversation, he's like, oh, I'd love to catch up with you afterwards. And we had another meeting to talk about this. But I think that intersection does exist. So here's, I guess, the question for you. Why do you think that this and blind spot may be the wrong word, but why do you think that people
Mm.
aren't seeing this? Why do you think this has not been, because again, if we can go upstream, there's so much that we can prevent, and that's the goal of public health. How do we do this? And why are we not there right now? And I know that's a really tough question. I mean, it's like, why is the system broken, Nancy? Tell me, what can we do to fix
Uh,
it? But I'm curious, kind of, well, why do you think
yeah.
that, and what can we do about it?
Well, I think there are several factors at play. I think probably the most obvious answer is sort of the historical foundations of our fields. Public health is focused around, vaccination and tuberculosis and chronic disease prevention. And that's where the roots of public health are. The tools of public health have allowed us to expand into other areas, which we're doing, but not at the pace that we had been before. Meanwhile, topics like child welfare really come out of the social work field, and they're leaning more toward prevention. At the same time, public health is kind of leaning our tools toward those kinds of topics. So it's building these intersections. And I think funders and journal editors are also kind of becoming wiser about those intersections, understanding that, we need neurobiologists and neuroscientists and pediatric child abuse pediatricians on study sections and authorship teams. And we need the science base to be built and scaffolded with people at the table who haven't otherwise been. And that is becoming, I think, more and more commonplace, just because we're able to really address these silos and sort of how things are structured. And we're seeing more transdisciplinary work generally. And we're building fields like dissemination and implementation, which cross sectors. And we're building centers that bring in these voices together. So I think it's happening. But, I hate to say it, it happens with like one collaboration at a time. And it happens with one webinar on Thursday, June 13th. But it's cross-cutting these things with intentionality. And I think also you have to approach science with a bit of humility. I've been an academic for 20 years, my entire professional career. And I fully recognize that there are tools I don't have, there are things I don't know, and I must be willing to come to any sort of public health challenge, willing to learn, willing to be vulnerable, willing to say, I have no clue. I mean, like my first email to you, what the actual hell? I think we can subtitle this whole hour as what the actual hell.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And I'm encouraged. I think it's really a wonderful thing. And in your intro, you mentioned that, I do improvisational theater, which, some people say, what's a biostatistician and a behavioral scientist doing in, the world of improv? But if we're able to tell our stories, if we're able to help each other and build a community and a network of people supporting each other based upon the ideas of, yes, parenting's really hard, and let me show you how we can create a really supportive network for that. Or, yes, it's really uncomfortable to go to school and be in school. And also there are ways to manage behavior in your classroom that can feel more fulfilling to you. And let's not worry about a script. Let's not worry about the right answer. Let's just have these moments of humanity where we can bring ourselves to this work in a way that just allows us to be a bit more vulnerable. And if we come at it like, I don't know all the answers, but I'm willing to listen and craft a story with you, then our solutions will be better, our questions will be better, our answers will be better. We're going to design things that actually work to address the actual issue and not like what we think is the risk factor for something. And it just becomes really much more powerful. I didn't answer your question, but
that's okay. And you led me to about 10 other questions, and I'm going to try to prioritize some of them. First, just a quick on the improv. Mary DeMichelle, One Rule Improv. Are you familiar with Mary's work?
No.
Okay. We've had Mary on the show before. Wrote a fantastic book called One Rule Improv, and was using improv and has used improv as a trauma informed intervention
Mhm.
to help kids who
Yeah,
were kids that had suffered a lot of trauma or were dysregulated, and it's been used in schools and other places. So really interesting. So,
there is.
and when you mentioned your connection to improv, of course, I was not surprised, because as I've known you now since whatever that date was, September 2022, um, you're full of surprises. So that doesn't surprise me. Another thing you said, just quick random point here in your response, you mentioned it happens one webinar at a time. Um, you and I should co-present somewhere public health oriented and talk about this. We should go out there and start getting some of this messaging out there.
Yes.
There's such a strong connection point. I mean, when you think about,
Mhm.
again, you look at the traditional places where maybe public health programs were focused. And again, you go upstream of, a lot of chronic diseases, and you find trauma. You go, I mean, we go to the 20 years ago to the Kaiser ACEs study, right? And
Yes.
the adverse childhood experiences study, and
Yes.
see the long-term impact that these adverse experiences have on kids. And it's funny, because in my conversation with your colleague earlier this week, I always am, as you know, and in this, if we had a word count on this, would be said a lot. Talk about the upstream idea, right? Yeah, and talk about how, like, the work that we're trying to encourage is upstream, right? The work to, um, you know, the work to change the interventions, and to get trauma informed and neuroscience aligned mindsets into schools. That's upstream. But even upstream of that, maternal health and
Yes.
families, and as I was talking to your colleague, I was like, and upstream from this work that I think is really important is the work that you're doing. And these connections are strong and compelling. So, I mean, I think it is important that I mean, again, the sometimes a problem is because the way things have always been done, right? And it takes
Right.
somebody questioning things, or sharing something new.
Mm.
So, maybe rather than feeling overwhelmed that, like, why aren't these things in alignment, it is,
Yeah.
how do we change the world and bring them into alignment? So, real quickly, I just want to share a couple things here. We had another hello from Maryland, and actually, I normally am in Maryland, but I'm in West Virginia today at my son's house. But I know Jeannie, and good to see you there.
Hi, Jean.
And we have Amy here, and Amy, gosh, Amy used to be in Maryland, and then Connecticut, and now California. And Amy is a volunteer, and now helping us on social media. Amy is fantastic, and said, "This is pure gold." Yes.
Your
Uh,
goal.
Courtney has not left to go to the beach, and mentioned that Run Roll Improv was a great book,
Mhm.
and said the two of us should put on a presentation. So,
Let's
there we
do.
go. We have an
Yeah.
action item out of this discussion. So,
Well, can I go
yep,
back even
yep,
more?
yep,
So I think sometimes we go from health problem to risk factor to determinant to we keep moving upstream a little bit. And at some point we get to a place where we run into these aces and the trauma and all of that. And we have to be willing at that point in our work to really hear people's stories and to really understand their fear and really understand what they value and really understand that what they value and their trauma and their fear may be different than ours. And unless we're willing to do that, then how that affects the determinants and the risk factors and goes back upstream and goes downstream, then our interventions are going to be diluted because they're not. It's kind of like if somebody comes to the ER with some sort of infection, and you say, well, you have this infection, I'm going to give you some medicine, and the medicine has a lot of side effects, but it should help you, and you give a person a medicine, they go home with this medicine, but then the next day you get a phone call and they say, well, the cultures came back. That medicine's not even going to help the infection that you have. We need to give you a different medicine. And I think sometimes in public health, or even in this work we do, we develop these programs just assuming that it's going to affect this trajectory of experience when we don't take the time to super understand the trauma, the fears, the concerns, the history, the culture that our populations are experiencing.
Um, what do you, so, again, kind of thinking about this from, the challenges perspective. Um, you talked about, kind of your pathway from behavioral science to neuroscience and trauma. Um, what's that look like in a public health arena in terms of, I mean, are you seeing a growing awareness around neuroscience and trauma? I mean, certainly you would think that trauma would be pretty heavily entrenched in that work. What's it look like out there?
What's it look like out there?
Yeah, yeah.
What the
What
actual
are the actual?
um well, it's interesting. I think that we haven't even scratched the surface of trauma. We haven't even really started to incorporate neuroscience, neurobiology, nervous system regulation in the work that we're doing. If anything, we're starting to understand it a little more. The Academy of Violence and Abuse really thinks a lot about, the ACEs and how that affects things. So we think about trauma as sort of an independent variable. So how that is affecting, quality of life and longevity and chronic disease and all those things. It's interesting to me that what we're learning now, I think where we're seeing it kind of play out in the public health work, is how neuroscience is understood in terms of child development. And for our work, I think that's really important and very illuminating. There's the protective factors framework is widely used for developing interventions that help parents parent positively, for instance. And knowledge of child development, if you can increase a parent's knowledge of child development, you decrease the parent's likelihood of using maladaptive parenting strategies. And so for a while, that looked like, here are the developmental milestones, and here's all the things you need to be a parent. Now it looks like, here's what your kid's nervous system is doing. Here's how your child's brain is developing. Here's how they make decisions. Here's how they see the world. Here's when rational thought is developing. Here's when intentionality happens. And that, to me, is the most exciting intersection of neuroscience and public health, is just to say, even though your teenager looks like they are cognitively processing and making these rational choices, developing sort of a pro and a con lens of whatever decision they're making, they don't have yet the emotional skills to say, Mom, I'm really concerned about being left out at school. All my friends have that really fancy water bottle and I don't. What you hear from your teenager instead is, Mom, I hate you. Why won't you buy me the Stanley water bottle? I mean, I don't have a Stanley endorsement, but we're just beginning to understand that the way we hear kids, the way we see kids, reflects their state of neurodevelopment.
Right.
And whereas parents are like, don't you talk to me with that level of disrespect. Now parents understand, oh, that's not disrespect. If I look underneath that disrespect, this is my kid being afraid of being isolated and lonely and left out, and not having the skills to say those words. And instead, they demonstrate that fear in their behavior, in how they're speaking to me. So if I punish that behavior, have I taught them anything? No. Have I addressed their fear? No. But if I'm willing to peek underneath the hood, appreciate what's happening, then I can have a whole different parenting perspective, a whole different way of parenting and connecting with my kid that does address their isolation, their fear, their loneliness. And then, we're attuning, we're attaching. That's parenting.
Yeah. But I mean, and that, I mean, what you describe is a shift that is so needed. And
Right.
I mean, I was thinking about, I mean, and of course, your example, you were talking about a teenager, but I mean, we take that to even another level and say, okay, well, now we're talking about, an 8-year old with a disability. The
Sure.
expectations that get put on kids sometimes, both at home and in schools. Mona de la Hook, often kind of uses the term kind of neurodevelopmentally inappropriate, right? I mean, it's a,
Right.
this is a kid that's not at that place, but time after time, we see these situations where people look at behavior through this lens of intent and think that all behaviors are intentional. And that's why a lot of bad things happen to kids. So that shift is really necessary. And of course, in my perfect world, any new or prospective parent would read Mona de la Hook's Brain
Yes.
Body Parenting book, which I think
Yes.
is absolutely fantastic. I'll grab a link to that in a second.
Read Mona's.
And I wish it was around when when
Right.
my kids were young. I mean, I'll tell you
Yes.
as a personal story, and I'm sure you can relate. I mean, my son is now 18. My daughter just turned 15. Um, I learned a lot along the way, and I'm proud that I learned some things that were really important early on. I learned the impact of my response, and
Yeah.
how when I took a step backwards, or used a more soothing voice, or did whatever I could.
Mhm.
I think I became a fairly natural co-regulator with my kids before I knew what
Oh,
co-regulation was. But there were days before that I didn't. I had no idea about any of these things, and we can all look back in horror and go, "Oh, I don't believe I responded that way." But
right.
today, and back to Maya Angelou, like, there is knowledge out there. We know better, but oh, Nancy, it kills me. There's a tremendous amount of bad parenting advice still out there,
Yeah.
and that bad parenting rolls into our schools in terms of how people respond to kids. And the flip side of these things, not only not being effective, like you mentioned, well, when we're punishing this kind of stress behavior, not only is it's not effective, it can lead to trauma. It can lead to
Yes.
really more, not less behavior. So the more we're doing
Right.
a lot of these things that are failing, the more we're
Can and
failing.
does.
Yep, yep, yep. Yeah.
I mean, I
Um,
remember reading Alfie Kohn's book a long time ago, Punished by Rewards.
yep.
And I remember as a behavioral scientist thinking, like, that's not a thing.
Who's this
Rewards
cone
can't
guy?
be bad.
Right, 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 right,
What do
right.
you mean? We have a name for that. Why are you telling me that's bad? And then you read this and you think it's bad for the people who are being rewarded. It's bad for the people who are not being. I mean, it undermines everything. And I I have some sympathy for that only because I think about how we think about our job as parents. Like if you were to ask parents, what is your job as a parent? Many parents would say, well, to keep my kid in line, or to keep my kid compliant, or to make sure my child does not embarrass me, or that they're behaved when we go out, and that people compliment my child for being so well
Mhm.
behaved and all of that. And there have been long periods in history where that's the goal of what we should be doing as parents. And so in order to think about parenting differently, we have to think about the job, what our goal is, what do we want to identify with as a parent, and be willing to give up the things that are not serving us. And same with schools. Schools, how are we and how are they willing to give up the things that are not serving them or serving the children?
Mhm, 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 mhm. So I want to transition in here a little bit. One of the things that we plan to talk about during
Oh,
our
yes.
discussion today, and we're already like 45 minutes in, and we've talked about a lot of things. But one of the things that I want to talk about, and it's related to this, because I think that kind of looking at your work and your passion as a whole, it really, in my mind, is about helping families do better, helping kids do better. I know that you're very supportive of that kind of work. And one of the things that you shared with me as we began our conversations now a couple of years ago was the work that you were doing on a program called Support Over Silence. And I'm going to
Mhm.
actually bring up the website on the screen here, but I'd like you to tell me a little bit about
Sure.
what is Support Over Silence, how you got involved in it, and kind of how that factors into Dr. Nancy Weaver and the work that you do
Yeah,
and the work that you think is important. So tell
yeah.
me, give me the
The
kind of the
fit.
pitch about support over silence. What
This
is
is
it?
the pitch.
Yep.
Okay, so I guess it started in a pizza shop, and I'll abbreviate the story. As you said, I could tell stories for days, but it started in a pizza place with my family. And in this pizza place, there was a grandmother who was really visibly aggressive to her grandkids, shoving, pushing, yelling. And I will spare you the details, but this place that was like jubilant and Friday and beer and after work and pizza, the whole place just kind of got quiet. And we were all just sort of paralyzed in like what we should do to support this grandmother or how we should get it to stop. I ended up standing up, going over, engaging with the grandmother. Um, Afterwards, the manager came over, talked to me, thanked me. It was an ordeal. And I came back and asked my pediatricians, my psychology friends, all of my child development people, and I said, "Did I do the right thing?" And they said, "We don't know. There's no program in the whole world that teaches bystanders what to do when you see a moment of struggle like that." And I said, "Well, surely somebody has an answer." And I went to find the answer, and literally there was none. So I built a program. I got a team together at St. Louis University. We had funding from the Missouri Foundation for Health, and we built what was the original version of Support Over Silence, which is turned into a 3-hour training. We have a whole crew of trainers that's sort of spreading across the country, but it's a 3-hour training that is, what do you do? And it is anchored in this question of, why do we see this moment of distress? What can we as bystanders do when we feel the distress of watching that happen? Where are the neuro aligned tools for that? How can we make it simple? How can we address barriers? And it's turned out to be, I don't know if you'd call it the next pivot of my career, but now that we have several publications showing that there's very clear evidence of its efficacy, we are scaling this program. So we're sort of taking it on the road, engaging a lot of trainers, working with partners, integrating it into systems of care. And it's turned out to be a really important part of how we're training parents and teachers and business owners and really whomever on sort of the public meltdown, what's happening, how we should respond, and how we do that in a trauma-informed, humility, compassionate way. That's the short story.
It's interesting because I was looking at I've got the website up, and I was just kind of looking over the words in the title of Support Over Silence,
Uh-huh.
and although I've been familiar with this for some time, as my brain was mulling over these words, this idea of supporting people that are in tough moments is something certainly that is a focus of the work that we do here. And
Right. Right.
tough moments, as we know, behavior or rather emotions are contagious, right? The dysregulated child who's having a difficult time, if that caregiver and that caregiver is already at risk for becoming dysregulated because they're working with a child who's dysregulated. But if they become dysregulated, and then the
Uh-huh.
effect that it has on kind of everyone that might be there. But it's interesting because, again, the support part, which is, this is not about yelling at, criticizing, why are you doing that?
Right.
It's about, how do you offer support in a moment where someone is not at their best? I think that's really important. And the other piece,
Exactly.
kind of thinking about silence here, I'm going to get this story wrong, so nobody that knows the facts hold me to account here. But I remember hearing some story about kind of the origination of the 911 system, and going back to some kind of crimes that were happening in New York, and the idea that there was a murder, and although a number of people heard what happened, like nobody did anything to respond. And I think, in part in human nature, sometimes, like, there's something uncomfortable, and sometimes we don't. And I guess the one thing that I think I know to be true is that what may change whether or not somebody responds at a moment is, do they have knowledge, and do they have confidence? So I can see where a program like this might be helpful. But tell me a little bit more about kind of the training, the intervention. Like, obviously, the time we have, you can't provide the training, but I mean, what kind of things are you teaching people? And how do you, and again, there are probably some that would look at this and say, well, I don't want to get involved, right? I mean, that
Yeah,
sounds
right,
that sounds
right.
that sounds like the last thing I want to do.
And that's why it's named what it is. And you say that people get involved if they have confidence, if they perceive they have the skills. And I'll add one more: if they feel responsible, and if they can do so in a way that helps them address their own barriers for intervening. So
Hmm.
the reason people don't engage, there's a diffusion of responsibility. That is a useful social science term. There's also a social comparison, so that if I look around and nobody else is doing anything in that pizza shop, and well, everybody else isn't doing anything, therefore I assume that nothing needs to be done, right? So we anchor our behaviors on the normative culture. And so if we can train people in support over silence, the normative culture then shifts. And so a couple of points about what we do in the training. We've done some evaluation. I mean, obviously, I'm a scientist. So our evaluation, the last paper that we published, we asked people since the training, what have you done when you've seen an issue like this in public, like a yelling or hitting, a spanking, some sort of tussle between a caregiver and a child in public? Before the training, almost half the people, 46% of the people said, I ignored it. And we asked, what do you do? And they're like, well, I give them a really bad look, like, that's not nice, and I walk away. Like that's going to do anything. But
Yeah.
it makes us feel better because we're like, I just want you to know that I don't condone what you're doing, and I'm
Right.
not participating in that. And then they walk away.
Right. Right.
After the training,
And I'm sure that has a really regulating effect on the person who's already dysregulated, right? So here I am in the middle of yelling at my child, and I'm really dysregulated, and you give me a nasty look. That
exactly.
yeah. And in fact, I mean, in reality, it probably has a negative impact, because
It
there's a sudden social pressure that somebody's already feeling when they're dysregulated. So that nasty look that maybe somebody feels better about might in fact make things worse, right?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
we don't know. And so after the training, before the training, almost half said they tried to ignore it. After the training, 0% of people ignored it.
Hmm.
0%. So our whole MO is support over silence. Don't be silent, offer support. And we had this huge aha moment in the development of this program. Actually, it was in the scaling of the program a bit later down the line. And we were training all these people in all of our, our strategies and our programs, which we do by like thinking about our own values and how we approach things. And we throw in some improv and, all the stuff. We do some role play. We talk about these issues of responsibility and collective efficacy and building community and all the stuff. Finally, one of the women says in one of our trainings, she said, well, I don't want to go over there and talk to the mom because I don't have enough time to fix all the things that are wrong with her parenting. I was like, well, damn, isn't that insightful? Because one of the reasons we don't engage is we look at that and we go, oh, you are just way too far gone. I don't want to give you the whole lesson in like positive parenting and why you shouldn't spank your kid and all of those things. So you know what we did? We now incorporate in our training, big bold letters. You're not there to fix. You're not there to fix parenting. You are not there to be a coach. You are not there to run in on your high horse and fault somebody for managing a situation the way they're managing it. You are there to offer support. And like you said, whether you're co-regulating, whether you're validating, whether you're just helping to turn down the temperature, whether you're managing the cashiers and whomever else, you are there to lift up that parent so that parent can do the best they can in that situation. And once we started framing it like that, I mean, people said, I can do that. I can absolutely do that. And they do, and they do.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes just like with kids, sometimes being there, just being there for a dysregulated adult can be something that can be really helpful. Yeah, that's great. So where do you, and I'm kind of going through your website here,
Oh, I
and of
see.
course, yeah, you've got a section here on training, and so where is this training offered? And if people are interested in this training, is this something that individuals can sign up for? Or is it something that is being done kind of at a community level? How can people learn more, or if they're interested in taking training like this, how can they do that?
All of that. So there's a little connect button up at the top right. So they can click that little button, which gives a little flag to our organization, and we'll reach out to you. It works really, really well to offer support over silence as an organization or as a community. One thing that happens is that thanks, Amy. I love that. Reframing the idea of fixing to supporting is so important. I couldn't agree more. I'm glad that resonated with you. One of the ways I work with new communities, for instance, is I will go travel and conduct a training. I will identify people who want to become certified trainers. And then there's a 2-day class to become a certified trainer. And then the trainers can help train other people within their organization, new employees, whomever else, and they're free to conduct the training sort of using a business model that works for them. And we have all of the scaling, all the protocols, all the survey instruments, all the materials, all the PowerPoint, all the things.
Right.
And we work from there.
So one of the things that's going through my head, and probably won't surprise you, is I think about applicability of this, certainly in that community setting that you talked about, and I think about the importance of people doing something, right? Because it is really easy to do nothing, and when nothing is done, the potential of harm, the potential of abuse, the potential of trauma is high. But I'm also thinking about this, and I'm kind of curious. Have you conducted training for this in settings like schools? Because I can think about situations where, and frankly, a lot of the situations that are things that are on our radar. When a teacher has become so dysregulated by a behavior that they are now dragging a kid by their feet, and we've seen this, to a seclusion room, that's a very dysregulated adult who honestly, I mean, we may be angry and we may have a lot of feelings about that, but that's a person that needs support, needs somebody to not be silent. But in systems, sometimes there's a culture of silence, and that sometimes these things happen, and people are like, I didn't feel right about it, but like, it's not my place to say anything. Or so have you done this kind of work in settings like that? And tell me a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, there's a group in Kentucky. Kentucky is doing amazing work through the Kentucky Youth Advocates. And we have trained members of they have a youth resource group that works in schools, and we've trained members of their staff. We've also trained people at a pediatric hospital. So there are not just parents, but people working with children who benefit from this whole framing that seems relatively straightforward when you unpack it, because you're exactly right. And so we offer a lot of kind of wraparound services to support over silence, which is like, parent education, looking at your policies, creating spaces that are, supportive of like over sensory issues that are very dysregulating. So there's a lot of things that kind of go with that. And you are exactly right. We get uncomfortable when we see any of that. And it even extends beyond that. even to like elder care, or, you
Right.
know,
Oh,
when
yeah.
we see people in the airport who are upset, we have become a culture that is sort of looking down because we don't remember what it means to have that moment of connecting with people, and we bring
Mhm.
our own set of fears to that, and I don't know what to say, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know what will be welcome. And
Mhm.
the kids framework, it's supportive or silence for kids,
Right.
and kids is KID. It's an acronym for all the strategies that we use. The first one is K, kind words. And people say, well, kind words isn't a child maltreatment prevention strategy. And I'm like, well, let me tell you, if you can offer a kind word and validate, and even a kind gesture, even a kind being around somebody, sharing your positive energy, just anything that is perceived as a soft, welcoming gesture has been shown to be hugely supportive. We have talked to people who are adults that were abused as children, and they say out loud, if one person would have given me any indication that how I was being treated was not
Right.
okay,
Right.
it would have made all the difference. And so they say, you know, like, my life changed when one woman that happened to be at a shopping place said something to me about, like, I was really important to the world or something. You know, you just, it's sometimes it's really mind-boggling to me how we have forgotten that reaching out and supporting each other in those times can be very, very simple and very, very meaningful.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. So I have one more question for you here, and I want to
Yeah.
transition a little bit. But
Okay.
what about risk? So somebody's really dysregulated. They're yelling at their kid. You've taken the training, and you have some. And in fact, I need to let you finish because you started with kids, and we didn't get through that all the way. But sorry,
With
that's
ideas.
right, that's right. But what about that potential risk that by intervening you're putting yourself in harm's way?
Yeah. First of all, I have almost stopped using the word intervening
Mm,
because I don't think that's what we're doing. We're offering support, but it shouldn't look like an intervention.
mm, mhm.
So that's number one. Number two is the first part of the whole training is like reflecting on our own personal barriers. You know, so do you have the barrier of not feeling safe? Do you have the barrier of, I don't have kids, so I don't think I'm qualified to speak about parenting? Do you
Mm,
have the barrier
mhm,
of race? There's a lot of race conversations. Like, you know, well, I would approach somebody who was my race, but not a different race, you know? So there's, and we have that conversation. That's why our facilitators are very well trained in how to have those conversations. And we build an environment where we can have a talk about, like, I'm not going to go talk to that person who's womping up on their kid. Well,
mm,
then how can you? You know, how can you support that parent by maybe getting someone else involved who doesn't have the same barriers as you? And to your point about safety, if we're not asking somebody to intervene and to fix parenting and to intercept and to like stop the
mm, mhm,
behavior,
mhm, mhm,
it's amazing that bystanders, that participants, they are way less concerned about safety because you're
mm,
not doing anything that is particularly threatening.
mm,
You're
mhm,
not saying, excuse me, parent, you're doing that wrong. Let me show you how to do it right. You're saying, parent, I want to lift you up and support you to do parenting how
mm,
you would
mhm,
do it if you were regulated. And let me help you do that. And
mm.
that might look a lot of different ways, but in no way does that look like a threat.
Mm, mhm, mhm. And Amy just jumped in and said intervene is one of my least favorite words. So mine are compliance and what's the other one? There's
Yeah.
another one that just flew out of my head. So before I move on, kids,
Mhm.
you started to say kind.
Ah,
Okay, finish that
okay,
off.
okay. So K, kind words or gestures. I, um, Well, it's so funny that I said intervene is one of my least favorite words, because when we first built it, I was intervene directly, which means basically call out, it looks like you're struggling. Can I help you? Like something that engages very directly with the situation. D is distract.
So you're going to rename that acronym, right? You're going to find a new I word, right?
Yeah. As of like 3 o'clock today.
Introspect, think about how you're feeling at that moment, right? There are things we could do.
Distract is more of a playful gesture, and some people say, well, I do that all the time, like, oh, I like your shoes, or I sing a song in the produce aisle, or I say, like, excuse me, what time's the bus coming, or something that just sort of brings people out of this moment of dysregulation and anchors their attention on the silly lady picking bananas in the grocery store. So that's distract. And then the last is S, which is seek help. And seek help is not, as we're pretty clear about, it's not like call 911 or call security, unless there are those concerns, or you're a mandated reporter, or, all of these other things. But it may be, like, you can't tell this, but I mean, that I'm short. I'm like 5 feet tall. I'm a little wisp of a thing. And so if I saw, one of my barriers is like people who are tall, a tall, imposing person would feel maybe a little bit like I would have my own, I'm not sure. Or somebody that was behaving really in a hostile way, I might have barriers about that. But maybe my husband doesn't. So maybe if we're somewhere and there's an issue, maybe I'd say, hey, honey, here's a water bottle. Could you go give this to that guy over there? Or, something that really says, I have a community of people around that I could coach to offer support to that person. If I am in a hurry, I have my kids with me. If I'm not in a position to help, I can coach somebody else to do that. And what's funny is that when we train, we trained a bunch of people at a pediatric hospital, the social work staff, they were the most appreciative, because they said, you're training people to do the things that I do when people call me. And so if the cafeteria worker and the flower shop lady and the front desk staff person, if they can do all the things you're training them to do, I can go back to doing my job. And so that's a win.
Yeah. So anybody that's watched our podcast or events for any amount of time has heard me say this before. Social workers are the best people in the world. They really are. I mean, social workers, we work with a lot of different professionals, and but there's something about social workers. They're just people that are doing things from the heart. And so anyway, I'm sure there's a terrible social worker out there, but I
haven't met them.
That's right. So I want to transition to a couple of quick things here as we're wrapping up. We've kind of rounded the bottom of the hour here. We got a few more minutes. One of the things that you have done and that you have a lot of expertise in, that you leveraged for support over silence and throughout your career, is that data piece, and is really analyzing the effectiveness of I was going to say that I word again, of different approaches. So tell us a little bit about your work in terms of you've got a lot of background in, how do we know that these things that we create work? What are the things that you do that? So, and I'm not giving you an hour to talk about that, but tell us a little bit about your work in that area and how you leverage that for support over silence.
Right. So maybe to tell that story, I'll tell you that I've recently joined TikTok, and here's why. People get a lot of information from TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. And when you ask people where they get parenting advice, they say, well, I have people I follow on TikTok. But the expert, the pediatricians and the neuroscientists, for the large part, aren't on TikTok. So I was like, well, I need to at least be on TikTok to have, at least offer a scientific perspective on parenting and translate the knowledge that's coming out of the academy and coming out of science and coming out of practice into accessible information for parents. I don't talk like a neuroscientist on TikTok. I'm not a neuroscientist. And yet, one of the most important things that we can do as stewards of people's attention is to offer them information that is effective, and if they adopt it, will change their life for the better. And just like we talk a lot about like which diet should I have, and which oral health and sleep and all of the levers for mental health, and people have limited attention, they have limited budgets, they have limited capacity to process information. So we as public health professionals, we owe it to our audience to tell them the things that work. And so I have a responsibility when I develop programs to develop programs that are likely to work. I use knowledge of my community. I use the theory. I do a deep dive into the evidence and what I know about an issue and a problem. And then I pilot test it. I take a few people and I give them the thing. I design a program with those levers in mind. Every single piece of my program is intentional. There's not 5 minutes of my program where somebody's going to go, Weaver, what are you doing? Everything is designed to move a lever that I know will change an outcome that's important. So then I design it, but then I don't know. I mean, I'm good, but I don't know how good I am. So then I collect data. The data I collect I designed the program to do these 5 things. How do I operationalize those 5 things? Oh, here are the ways I operationally define those. What method should I use to collect data to see if those things changed? How am I going to collect that data? And once I do collect that data, how am I going to analyze it? And if I'm not doing that, I mean, in public health, I was making a big circle, but it's iterative. So it's this cycle of building, evaluating, iterating, scaling. We're always doing that. And if I'm not, then I don't have confidence that I'm going to pitch an idea to somebody and they're going to say, well, I used your program and it didn't help me at all. And sure, it may be the case that it doesn't. But I have to be as tactical with my public health programming as a surgeon does with their scalpel. And if I'm not, it's irresponsible. It's a bad use of time, and it doesn't make the impact that it needs to make. So I'm big into the storytelling and the content and the social sciences, but absolutely anchored on, is this impactful, and how do I know, and how can I justify to other people that what I'm pitching to them will be useful?
So you have this expertise and experience then of kind of evaluating and evaluating programs and creating ways to measure and make sure, in fact, that you're doing what you intend to do. Which of course is another interesting intersection point for us. Because we've had this collaboration or for a long time, it was just our every other month conversation we would have.
Right.
But we've had an opportunity to collaborate a little bit more intentionally as well. And one of the things that I was going to share is that you've actually been brought in to help out with a program that we've been working to develop with the Crisis Prevention Institute, Reframing Behavior, in terms of helping to develop the ways of helping to measure the metrics and ensuring that what we're creating here is can be measured and is doing the things that it intends to do. So it was really exciting to have you kind of as part of that, because I think the program, of course, I'm really excited about it. It's getting released officially next week, and this program will be in schools across the country here really soon. And of course, the program is all about bringing the neuroscience of behavior to mainstream schools. But one of the really important things that we talked about from the beginning is being able to articulate the evidence and the work that supports it and the outcomes. So having you working on that, I think, has been a great benefit of what we're trying to do with that. So that's another, I think, exciting intersection of the things that we're doing together. But I think there's more opportunity beyond that as well.
Super fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. and that really is you sort of mentioned the science of public health. I mean, if I have a biostatistics training, and training then in psychometrics, and how are we measuring and capturing and really providing evidence to the scientific community, so that when I do get on TikTok and I say, hey, let me tell you about connection over correction, and where all the little the quippy little things that the field is evolving to use, all of that is really important. But how do we know? Like, how do we know it's useful? What's the evidence? What are we learning about the brain? And I think, I think people are way smarter than we give them credit for. When you start telling them how and why and showing them the evidence, then I have found parents and business owners and the people we're talking to about supportive resilience to be super receptive to those ideas, because it resonates with us. We were all going like, it doesn't feel good to spank my kid, and now we go, oh, I got it.
That's right. Yeah. So, I love what you've been doing on TikTok, and you've been and again, it's about, how do we because, I hate to say this, but scientists are not always the most effective communicators, and you can end up with fantastic siloed information that never gets out to people in a way that is digestible and understandable. And you've been doing some great stuff. I'm going to put up here a link to your TikTok and invite people to follow you there. And of course, you've got, as we talked about at the beginning of the hour here, you're on LinkedIn as well. So other professionals or other like-minded people that want to connect can connect with you there as well. But definitely check out the TikTok channel. So we have reached about our time, but I want to give you an opportunity, if you have any kind of final thoughts, any final words that you want to leave us with as we end today's show.
Goodness. I think the final words may be something along the lines of where we started. All of your viewers have a role to play here, and everyone is attracted to your mission, for their own reasons and their own stories, and never to minimize that. The work that you're doing is leading the way, and I think we are all capable of being leaders, and we're all capable of bringing energy to these topics that are really important. And so my challenge would be that we all be sort of active bystanders in this field, if you will, and find ways that we can do that are kind of almost sometimes big and scary. I spent a lot of my career like looking for the people who are going to do the work, like even as a bystander, who's going to make this grandmother stop womping up on her kid? Like, who's going to... No, it's us. It's all the people in the chat. It's all the people listening. It's you stepping forward and doing this work. It's sending a LinkedIn message. It's really collapsing the silos and having moments of humanity where we're very vulnerable in advancing things that are important. And I think if we do that, and we listen to people's stories, and we share stories, and we work together in human people ways, that we're going to do great things. And this is shifting, this shift to really respecting children in hearty ways where they can grow to be flourishing people. The shift is on, and we're building on the backs of amazing. I mean, you mentioned Mona's work, like she's amazing. It's just, we have so many people who have put up some guideposts for us, and we just need to keep scaffolding. So thank you for your work, and thank you for this conversation.
I love it. Yeah. And you're so right. It's the, if you don't, who will, right? And, when I started the Alliance, I never planned to start a nonprofit. I never planned to, try to lead this kind of change, and I never planned to quit my job. I mean, but again, sometimes if you don't, who will? And, we've got so many amazing allies out there that are doing incredible work, and what I would say is that the vast majority of them, the people that I've gotten to know, are people that are doing this work for the right reasons, that are doing this work to make a positive difference. Now, I can't say that everybody always falls in that boat, but I think the vast majority of people do. I mean, they really are doing this I mean, you think about those social workers, and I mean, invariably they're people that somewhere along the line, like, I want to help people. And we really can. I mean, I'm a firm believer that we can make a difference. And as individuals, we have a lot more ability to influence change than we think, but we've got to do it. So anyway, with that, I want to thank you for being here today, and thank our audience who has been on with us here for this hour and however long it's been. I appreciate everybody that's spent some of their time with us today. We're going to go ahead and let everyone go. And Dr. Weaver, I'm going to ask you to stick around. We're going to say goodbye to everybody, but you to stick around for 1 second so I can give you one more thank you. And again, if you're watching live, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching this. The reason we do these events is that we want to share good ideas. We want to share things that hopefully will be inspiring, that will lead to change. And I encourage you, as always, like, share these events, share them with colleagues, share them with other families, share them with anyone you can, because that's how we make change. And one final thing in that note of sharing, if you're watching on YouTube, go subscribe to our channel. We're trying to get I think 1,000 subscribers. Yeah, we're so close, and so and it doesn't cost you anything. It's quick, it's easy. You hit a button and it's done. But you're going to make us happy, and that's good. So anyway, thank you everybody for being here today. I'm going to go ahead and sign off here, and we will see you again, I think, in 2 weeks, if not sooner, because we've got a couple special events coming up this month. Thank you, Dr. Weaver. I will talk to you in a moment.